Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to explain two key concepts in linguistics, morpheme and morph. Let's start with the idea of a morpheme. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning or grammatical function in a language. What does that mean? It means you can break it down any further without losing its meaning. For example, the word book is just one morpheme because if we break it down, it doesn't give us smaller meaningful parts. But in books, we actually have two morphemes, book, which gives the meaning, and s, which marks the plural. In unhappy, there are also two morphemes, un meaning not, and happy, which carries the meaning. Another example, redo. Here, re means again and do is the action. Or teacher. Teach is the verb and means the person who does. From this example, you can see that some morphemes can stand alone. We call them free morphemes, like book, run, or happy. Others cannot stand alone and must be attached to something else. Those are bound morphemes like as, ed, ing, an, and re. So in short, morphemes are the building blocks of word. Now, let's move to morph. If the morpheme is the abstract idea or unit of meaning, then the morph is the physical form, the actual sound we say or the letters we write. Let's take the sentence, I parked the car. If we break it down, I is a morph, pronounced I. Park is a morph, pronounced park. The is a morph, pronounced the. Car is a morph, pronounced car. So here, the abstract morphemes, like the idea of I, the action park, the past tense ed, and the object car, are realized in real speech as morphs. Another example, he walks fast. He is a morph, walks is a morph. Inside it, we know there are two morphemes, walk and s. But when we hear it, the physical form is walks. Fast is a morph. And one more example, we are running. We is a morph. Are is a morph. Running is a morph. Again, it has two morphemes inside, run and ing, but the actual shape in speech is the morph running. So, to make the distinction clear, a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning, the abstract building block. A morph is the actual spoken or written form that represents that meaning. That's the key difference, and understanding both help us see how language is built from small meaningful pieces into larger structures. Thank you.
Hello everyone, now I will continue by discussing two related concepts, allomorph and complementary distributions. As we know, a morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning in a language, but the same morpheme does not always appear in exactly the same form. When a single morpheme has more than one spoken form, we call this variation allomorph. So, an allomorph is simply a different version of a morpheme, but it always carries the same meaning. In the other word, the form changes, but the function stays the same. To make this clearer, let's look at an example from English. The regular past tense morpheme is written as at. We can see it in words like wanted, cleaned, called, missed, and helped. But notice something interesting. In each of these words, the at is not pronounced in the same way. In fact, the suffix at has three possible pronunciations, it, the, and the. These are the three allomorphs of the past tense morpheme. For example, in wanted, it pronounced as eat. In cleaned or cold, it is pronounced as d. And in missed or helped, it pronounced as t. So, even though the spelling is always the same, the actual sound changes depending on the final sound of the verb. Why do we have this different form? This is explained by the concept of complementary distribution. Complementary distribution means that each allomorph appears in a different environment, and the environments do not overlap. In other words, you will never find two allomorphs used in exactly the same situation. They complement each other to cover all possible contexts. Let's look at the rules for the past tense ed. The suffix is pronounced as it if the verb ends in the sound d or t. For example, wanted. Here an extra vowel is added to make the word easier to pronounce. The suffix is pronounced as the if the verb ends in any other voiced sound except d. For example, cleaned or cold. Notice that the final consonant before ed is voiced, so the suffix also takes the voiced form. And the last suffix is pronounced as t if the verb ends in a voiceless sound except t. For example, missed. Since the final sound of the verb is voiceless, the suffix becomes voiceless too. So, to summarize, the three allomorphs it, d, and t are in complementary distribution. They all represent the same morpheme, but each one is restricted to a different environment and they never appear in the same place. This shows us something very important in linguistics. Variation in form does not always mean variation in meaning. Even though the past tense ed sound different in different words, its meaning as a marker of a past tense is always consistent. That's all from me. Thank you very much.
Hello everyone, my name is Mama Zafir, and in this part of the video, we're going to discuss the next topic regarding conditions that affect the choice of allomorphs. As we know from the previous speaker, allomorphs are essentially different forms or morphs that represent the same morpheme. But how do we know which allomorphs to use? Well, it is in fact not random. There are certain conditions that determine which allomorphs that we're going to use. There are 4 conditions that affect the choice of allomorphs, and I will mainly talk about 3 of them, while the last one will be briefly explained by the next speaker, to which then she will transition to the next topic. So, the 3 conditions that I will be explaining are: first, phonological conditioning; second, grammatical conditioning; and third, lexical conditioning. Okay, so let's move on to the first conditional, phonological conditioning. It means that the choice of the allomorphs is based on the sound that comes immediately before it. Okay, immediately before the suffix that precedes the suffix. To give a much more clear example or explanation, we're going to use the same example that we have used in the previous topics, which was regular past tense suffix ed in English. Okay, so this suffix is one morpheme and has the meaning of past tense grammatically. Okay, and it has 3 allomorphs. Okay, the first one is ed as in wanted. Next one is ed as in moved. The last one is t as in part. Okay, now this different forms aren't random. They are chosen based on the neighboring sound, the sound that comes immediately before the suffix. Okay, so we can add the allomorphs ed if the verb ends. Okay, ends. It means that these sounds comes immediately before the suffix. Okay, if the verb ends in an alveolar stop sounds like t or d, that's when we use the allomorphs ed. Or we can also add the allomorphs d if the verb ends in voice segment. Okay, in voice segment. In the example here, we have the word move. Move ends with a voice consonant v. That's why the allomorph that we have to use is d. The last one, we can, the other allomorph, the other allomorph is t. Okay, we can add this if the verb ends in voiceless segment. Okay, the example here, we have the word park. Park ends in it with the voiceless consonant k. That's why the allomorph that we have to use is t. Okay, so from here we can conclude that suffix, okay, that suffix adapts to the surrounding sounds to make the pronunciations much more clear. Okay, so let's move on to the second conditional, grammatical conditioning. This means that the choice of an allomorph is based on the presence of a grammatical element. To make the explanation much more clear, let's take a look at this example here. We have two words in present tense and also their past form. Okay, so from here we can see that in English, yeah, usually or the majority of cases, the presence of past tense morpheme, and here we have the past tense ed, does not really impact the selection of an allomorph that represents the verb itself. Okay, instead we just put the allomorph at the end of the verb. Okay, but in certain verbs, in certain cases, okay, let's take a look at another example here. We have words like weep and sweep. Yeah, when they change into the past form, the words become wept and swept instead of weep or sweep. This is because in certain verbs, okay, the presence of past tense morpheme requires the selection of a special allomorph of the verb. So the verb itself looks like it changes, not you just add some suffix after the verb ends. This another example here. Look at this shake and take. In here, the past tense morpheme dictates the allomorphs of k and t in the word shake and take respectively. Okay, so let's move on to the last conditional that I will be explaining. Lexical condition. This means that the choice of an allomorph is based or depends on a specific words. What does that mean? Well, let's take a look at the plural morpheme of English as in s. Okay, it is realized by a phonologically conditioned allomorphs as in as, z, and is. But in certain words, like ox, the plural form does not follow this condition. Okay, so from ox it does not become oxes. Instead, from ox it becomes oxen instead. Okay, so in conclusion, yeah, lexical conditioning is when a unique word may need a unique allomorph.
Number 4 is suppletion. This is the most extreme case. Here, two forms of the same morpheme look completely different. For instance, good becomes better, not gooder, or the verb go becomes went in the past tense. There is no sound connection at all, so we simply have to memorize them. Okay, next let's talk about homophony. This means that one single form can represent more than one morpheme. For example, the ending s in cats marks plural, but the same as in walks marks third person singular. So the form is the same, but the meaning depends on the context. Okay, now let's go back to the main topic, allomorphs. A morpheme is the smallest unit of meaning. For instance, the morpheme ed shows past tense, but here's the interesting part. We don't always pronounce ed the same way. That's why we call them allomorphs. Different sounds, but the same meaning. Okay, there are three ways to pronounce ed. The first one is pronounced id after t or t sounds, like in wanted or needed. The second one is pronounced t after voiced consonant sounds, like in played or robbed. The third one is pronounced t, t, after voiceless consonant sounds, like in walked or laughed. Okay, next, portmanteau morph. This refers to one single form that expresses several grammatical meanings at the same time. For example, the ending s in he walks. It marks three things at once. First is third person, second, singular subject, and third is present tense. So, one morph carries multiple pieces of information. Okay, we have learned that morphemes are the smallest units of meaning in language, but they can appear in different forms. That's why we studied concepts like suppletion, where the forms look completely different, and homophony, where one form represents more than one meaning. We also looked at allomorphs, which are different pronunciations of the same morpheme, such as the three ways to pronounce ed. Finally, we explored the portmanteau morph, where a single form expresses multiple grammatical meanings at once. In short, these concepts show us how flexible and complex the structure of words can be, and how understanding them helps us to analyze language more clearly.
Alright, now let me continue with the last part of our discussion. I will explain the other three concepts: syncretism, zero allomorph, and empty morph. Let's go through them one by one. First, let's talk about syncretism. Syncretism happens when the same word form is used to represent different grammatical meanings. Take the word walked. In the sentence, I walked to school yesterday, the word walked shows the past tense. Meanwhile, in the sentence, I have walked across the street, the same form walked is actually a past participle. So here, one single form expresses two different grammatical functions. But irregular verbs like go, went, gone, take, took, taken, or see, saw, seen don't show syncretism because their forms are always distinct. Next, we have zero allomorphs. This occurs when a morpheme is present, but it is not visibly marked in the word. For example, he hit the ball very hard yesterday. Last week, I cut the grass. She shut the window before going to bed. He put his phone on the table last night. All of these verbs are past tense, but they don't have the typical ed ending. In these cases, the past tense morpheme is still there, but it is realized by a zero allomorph. Finally, let's look at the concept of empty morphs. An empty morph is an element in a word that does not actually represent any morpheme. In other words, it doesn't carry meaning. For example, medicine becomes medicinal, person becomes personal, sense becomes sensual, fact becomes factual. In the first two examples, the adjective is formed simply by adding the suffix -al. But in words like sensual or factual, there's an extra U sound. This U sound is an empty morph because it doesn't represent any morpheme, it's just there to connect parts. To conclude, we've looked at three important concepts. Syncretism, when one form carries multiple grammatical functions. Zero allomorph, when one morpheme exists but is not overly marked. And empty morph, when one form appears but has no meaning. That's all from our group. Thank you for watching.